Carl Jung explained, 10 ways your body reveals the truth about your emotions. There's a psychological phenomenon so counterintuitive, so deeply buried in the human psyche, that when Carl Jung first identified it, even his closest colleagues thought he had gone too far. It's the discovery that we often ignore, withdraw from, and emotionally abandon the very people we love most deeply, not because we don't care, but precisely because we care too much. Jung called this love-avoidance, the unconscious protective mechanism that causes us to create distance from those whose love we most desperately need. It's the reason why the husband who adores his wife finds himself scrolling his phone when she's talking. It's why the mother who would die for her children becomes emotionally unavailable when they need her most. It's why the friend who claims to value your relationship most is the one who never calls. But here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. This isn't cruelty. This isn't indifference. This is love activating our deepest survival mechanisms. And once you understand this hidden psychology, you'll never see human relationships the same way again. The Jungian Foundation, setting the psychological stage. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, Jung wrote, and nowhere is this more evident than in how we approach love. To understand why we avoid those we love most, we must first understand Jung's revolutionary insight into the structure of human consciousness. Jung discovered that our psyche operates on multiple levels simultaneously. There's the conscious mind, what we're aware of, what we think we control. But beneath this lies the personal unconscious, filled with repressed memories, forgotten traumas, and emotional experiences too overwhelming for our conscious mind to process. And deeper still lies the collective unconscious, the inherited psychological patterns that have guided human survival for millennia. When it comes to love, Jung identified a profound contradiction at the heart of human nature. We are biologically programmed to seek connection. It's literally a matter of survival. The child who cannot maintain attachment dies. The adult who cannot form bonds becomes isolated and vulnerable. But we are also programmed to protect ourselves from the ultimate vulnerability that love demands. Think about this for a moment. Love, in its truest form, requires us to become completely dependent on another person's choices. It asks us to invest our emotional well-being, our sense of security, our very identity in someone whose behavior we cannot control. Love demands that we hand over the keys to our happiness to another human being and trust them not to destroy us. Jung understood that this creates what he called the love paradox. We desperately need what we're terrified to fully accept. And so the unconscious develops sophisticated strategies to keep us safe from the very connection we most deeply crave. The recognition. Friedrich's story begins. Let me tell you about Friedrich, a successful architect in his early 40s who came to understand this paradox in the most painful way possible. Friedrich loved his wife Elena with an intensity that sometimes frightened him. When she walked into a room, his heart would literally skip a beat. When she laughed, he felt complete in a way he had never experienced before meeting her. When she was away on business trips, he would count the hours until her return. But here's what confused everyone who knew them, including Friedrich himself. Whenever Elena tried to have a meaningful conversation, Friedrich would find himself checking his phone. When she shared something important about her day, he would suddenly remember urgent work that needed his attention. When she reached for emotional intimacy, Friedrich would become inexplicably tired or distracted. Elena began to believe that Friedrich didn't really love her. Friends started questioning whether their marriage was genuine. Friedrich himself wondered if he was capable of authentic love. But Jung's work reveals that Friedrich's behavior wasn't evidence of lack of love. It was evidence of love triggering his deepest protective mechanisms. You see, Friedrich had learned early in life that depending on someone completely was dangerous. His mother, whom he adored, had left when he was 7 years old. His father, whom he desperately wanted to connect with, was emotionally unavailable and critical. Friedrich's unconscious had catalogued a simple but devastating equation. The more you need someone, the more power they have to destroy you. So when Elena's love activated Friedrich's deepest longing for connection, it simultaneously activated his most primitive survival mechanisms. His unconscious whispered, "This woman has the power to devastate you the way your mother did. Create distance, protect yourself, survive." The psychology of protective love. Jung discovered that love avoidance operates through what he called unconscious protective strategies. These aren't conscious decisions. They're automatic responses programmed by our earliest experiences of attachment and loss. The first strategy is emotional numbing. When love threatens to overwhelm our defenses, the unconscious simply shuts down our ability to feel. We become robotic, going through the motions of relationship without emotional engagement. We're physically present but psychologically absent. The second strategy is distraction and busyness. The unconscious fills our attention with anything other than the person whose love we fear. Work becomes urgent. Hobbies become consuming. Social media becomes irresistible. Anything to avoid the terrifying vulnerability of complete presence with someone we love. The third strategy is unconscious rejection behaviors. We become critical, demanding, or emotionally unavailable in ways that push our loved ones away. If they leave, we tell ourselves, at least we weren't blindsided by abandonment. But here's Jung's most profound insight. These protective mechanisms aren't random. They're directly proportional to the depth of our love. The more someone matters to us, the more our unconscious works to protect us from them. The person whose approval we most desperately want becomes the person we're most likely to ignore. The relationship we most need to succeed becomes the relationship we unconsciously sabotage. The mirror effect, what we see in others. Take a moment right now and think about someone in your life who seems emotionally unavailable to you. Someone who claims to care but whose actions suggest indifference. Someone who says you matter but whose behavior suggests you don't. Jung would ask you to consider this possibility. What if their avoidance isn't evidence that you don't matter, but evidence that you matter too much? What if their emotional unavailability is actually a measure of how much power you have to hurt them? This is Jung's mirror principle in action. What we observe in others often reflects our own unconscious patterns. The person whose love avoidance triggers your anger or hurt may be showing you exactly how you behave with the people who matter most to you. I want you to pause this video right now and think about this question. Who in your life gets the least of your emotional presence? Who do you find yourself most distracted around? Who triggers your urge to check your phone, create distance, or become unavailable? Comment below if you're willing to share, because Jung believed that recognition is the first step toward transformation. The person you're avoiding most emotionally is likely the person whose love you most desperately need and most deeply fear. The unconscious equation, love equals danger. Jung discovered that love avoidance stems from what he called unconscious equations, primitive psychological formulas that operate below the level of conscious awareness. For most people who struggle with love avoidance, the unconscious equation is devastatingly simple. Love equals vulnerability. Vulnerability equals danger. Therefore, love equals danger. This equation is usually formed in early childhood through experiences that teach us that depending on others is unsafe. The child who is abandoned learns that love leads to loss. The child who is criticized learns that emotional openness leads to shame. The child who is neglected learns that expressing needs leads to disappointment. But Jung identified something even more subtle and destructive. Sometimes love avoidance develops, not from trauma, but from love that feels too intense to survive. Children who are overwhelmed by a parent's neediness, or who become emotional caretakers for unstable adults, learn that love means being consumed by another person's emotions. Friedrich, as we'll see, experienced both patterns. His mother's abandonment taught him that love leads to devastating loss, but before she left, her intense emotional neediness had taught him that love means being responsible for another person's emotional well-being, a burden too heavy for a child to carry. So when Elena's love activated Friedrich's deepest longings, it also activated every protective mechanism he had developed to survive. His unconscious couldn't distinguish between Elena's healthy love and his mother's overwhelming neediness. It couldn't separate Elena's reliability from his mother's unpredictability. All it knew was that this woman had the power to affect him deeply, and that felt like mortal danger. The stages of love avoidance recognition. Jung identified 4 distinct stages that individuals go through as they begin to recognize their love avoidance patterns. Understanding these stages is crucial because each one presents unique challenges and opportunities for growth. Stage 1. Confused disconnection. This is where Friedrich began. He knew something was wrong in his relationships, but he couldn't identify what. He felt guilty about his emotional unavailability, but couldn't understand why he was behaving in ways that contradicted his conscious intentions. People in this stage often blame external circumstances, work stress, health issues, or their partner's behavior for their emotional distance. Stage 2. Painful recognition. This stage begins when individuals start to see the pattern of their love avoidance. They recognize that they consistently withdraw from people who matter most. This recognition is often devastating because it contradicts their self-image as loving people. Friedrich entered this stage when Elena finally confronted him. "I feel like you love everyone more than me. You're present with your friends, engaged with your colleagues, but with me, you're somewhere else." Stage 3. Understanding the protection. This is where Jung's insights become transformational. Individuals begin to understand that their avoidance isn't cruelty or indifference, it's protection. They see that their unconscious is trying to keep them safe from the vulnerability that love requires. Friedrich reached this stage when he realized that his emotional withdrawal always intensified after moments of particular closeness with Elena. Stage 4. Conscious choice. This final stage involves learning to recognize when love fear is activated and choosing presence over protection. It requires developing what Jung called conscious courage, the ability to stay emotionally present even when intimacy feels terrifying. The relationship damage, how love avoidance destroys connection. Before we explore how to heal love avoidance patterns, we must understand the devastating impact they have on relationships. Jung observed that love avoidance creates what he called invisible wounds, damage that's difficult to identify but profoundly destructive. The first casualty is trust. When someone consistently withdraws emotionally from us, we begin to question whether their love is real. We start to believe that we're not actually important to them, that their declarations of love are empty words. Elena began to feel like she was married to a stranger who occasionally performed the role of loving husband. The second casualty is intimacy itself. Love avoidance creates what Jung called false intimacy, relationships that look connected on the surface but lack emotional depth. Couples may live together, sleep together, even raise children together, while remaining emotional strangers to each other. The third casualty is the avoided person's self-worth. When someone we love consistently becomes distracted or unavailable in our presence, we internalize this as evidence that we're not worth their attention. Elena began to believe that she was somehow fundamentally unlovable, that there was something about her that made Friedrich need to escape. But Jung identified the most devastating casualty of all. The love-avoidant person loses access to the very connection they most desperately need. Friedrich's protective mechanisms kept him safe from vulnerability, but they also kept him isolated from the love that could heal his deepest wounds. The projection mechanism: why we can't see our own patterns. Here's where Jung's understanding becomes particularly sophisticated. He recognized that love-avoidant individuals typically can't see their own patterns because of what he called unconscious projection. We project our own love avoidance onto others, seeing them as the ones who are emotionally unavailable while remaining blind to our own withdrawal. Friedrich was convinced that Elena was the one with intimacy issues. When she tried to discuss their emotional distance, he would point to times when she had been tired after work, distracted by family obligations, or stressed about personal issues. He could see every instance of her momentary unavailability while remaining completely unaware of his own consistent emotional withdrawal. This projection mechanism serves a protective function. If Elena is the one with the problem, then Friedrich doesn't have to confront his own terror of intimacy. If she's the one who's difficult to connect with, then he doesn't have to face his own capacity for emotional abandonment. Jung discovered that projection always involves what he called the hook of truth. Friedrich could see Elena's occasional unavailability because he was so acutely sensitive to any sign of emotional distance, his own predominant pattern. We can only see in others what exists somewhere within ourselves. But here's the transformational insight: the very sensitivity that allows us to see others' emotional unavailability can become the tool for recognizing our own patterns. Friedrich's acute awareness of every moment Elena seemed distracted was actually a mirror reflecting his own constant emotional distraction. The vulnerability terror: why love feels like death. To truly understand love avoidance, we must explore what Jung called vulnerability terror, the unconscious fear that complete openness to love will lead to psychological annihilation. For individuals with love avoidance patterns, allowing themselves to be fully seen and completely dependent on another person's love doesn't just feel risky, it feels like death. Jung traced this terror to humanity's earliest survival mechanisms. For our ancestors, being cut off from the tribe meant literal death. The child who couldn't maintain attachment to caregivers died. These survival mechanisms are still active in our unconscious, interpreting love's vulnerability through the lens of life and death stakes. Friedrich's vulnerability terror manifested as a literal physical response. When Elena would look at him with complete love and acceptance, he would feel his heart racing, his breathing becoming shallow, his body flooding with the same chemicals that would activate if he were being chased by a predator. His unconscious interpreted Elena's love as mortal danger. But Jung discovered something profound. Vulnerability terror is actually love terror. The more capacity we have for deep love, the more our unconscious recognizes how much power another person could have over our emotional well-being. People who can only love superficially don't experience vulnerability terror because they're not risking their deepest selves. This means that Friedrich's terror in Elena's presence wasn't evidence that he didn't love her deeply enough. It was evidence that he loved her so much that his unconscious was treating her like a matter of life and death. The abandonment wound, the core trauma behind love avoidance. Jung identified abandonment wounds as the primary source of love avoidance patterns, but his understanding of abandonment was more nuanced than simple physical leaving. He recognized that emotional abandonment, being physically present with someone who is psychologically unavailable, can be even more damaging than physical abandonment. Friedrich's mother had emotionally abandoned him years before she physically left. She was present in the house, but absent in her heart, overwhelmed by her own emotional needs and incapable of providing the consistent, reliable love that children require for secure attachment. Friedrich learned that people could be physically present while being emotionally unreachable. But Jung discovered something that changes everything about how we understand abandonment wounds. Children don't just experience abandonment, they internalize it. Friedrich didn't just learn that others could abandon him, he learned to abandon himself. Whenever emotions felt too intense, whenever needs felt too great, whenever love felt too overwhelming, Friedrich would disconnect from his own feelings, just as his mother had disconnected from his needs. This self-abandonment becomes the template for all future relationships. Friedrich couldn't stay emotionally present with Elena because he had never learned to stay emotionally present with himself. Every time intimacy activated his deeper feelings, his unconscious would initiate the same disconnection that had protected him in childhood. The relationship dance, how love avoidance creates unconscious choreography. Jung observed that love avoidance creates what he called unconscious choreography in relationships, predictable patterns of pursuit and distance that both partners unconsciously maintain. Understanding this dance is crucial because it reveals how love avoidance is actually a collaborative creation. In Friedrich and Elena's relationship, the dance looked like this. Elena would reach for connection, which would trigger Friedrich's vulnerability terror and cause him to withdraw. Friedrich's withdrawal would trigger Elena's abandonment fears, causing her to pursue more desperately. Elena's desperate pursuit would increase Friedrich's sense of being overwhelmed and trapped, causing him to withdraw even further. Elena's increased pursuit would trigger Friedrich's deeper avoidance, creating a cycle that pulled them further and further apart. But Jung's insight reveals that both partners are participating in this dance unconsciously. Elena's pursuit isn't just about wanting connection, it's also about avoiding her own fear of being alone with herself. Friedrich's withdrawal isn't just about avoiding Elena's intensity, it's about avoiding his own capacity for deep feeling. The dance serves both partners' unconscious needs. Elena gets to feel like the one who wants connection, avoiding her own avoidance of solitude, and Friedrich gets to feel like the one who values independence, avoiding his own desperate need for love. The recognition breakthrough, Friedrich's awakening. Friedrich's breakthrough came during what Jung would call a recognition crisis, a moment when the unconscious pattern becomes undeniably visible. Elena had stopped pursuing him. She had gotten tired of feeling like she was begging for her own husband's attention and had begun to withdraw emotionally herself. Instead of feeling relieved by Elena's distance, Friedrich found himself becoming desperate for her attention. He started trying to engage her in conversation, suggesting activities together, even buying flowers, behaviors that had been foreign to him for years. But Elena, wounded by years of feeling ignored, wasn't responsive to his sudden attention. One evening, as Friedrich watched Elena read a book with complete absorption, he experienced what he later described as a moment of devastating clarity. He realized that he felt exactly the way Elena must have felt for years, ignored, unimportant, invisible to someone whose attention he desperately craved. In that moment, Friedrich understood that his withdrawal had never been about not loving Elena enough. It had been about loving her too much to survive her potential rejection or abandonment. Every time she had reached for him, his unconscious had whispered, "She has The power to destroy you the way your mother did. Create distance. Protect yourself. But now, with Elena emotionally unavailable, Friedrich could feel his own abandonment wound bleeding. He understood viscerally what Elena had been experiencing, and he began to see how his protection had become her punishment. The integration work, healing the split between love and fear. Jung's approach to healing love avoidance focused on what he called integration work, learning to hold both love and fear simultaneously without letting fear dictate behavior. This isn't about eliminating the fear of vulnerability. It's about developing the capacity to love despite that fear. Friedrich began by learning to recognize what Jung called love-fear activation, the physical and emotional signals that indicated his vulnerability terror was being triggered. He noticed that his chest would tighten when Elena looked at him with complete love. He observed that his mind would race toward distractions when she shared something emotionally significant. He became aware that his body would literally lean away from her during moments of intimacy. But recognition was only the first step. Jung emphasized that integration requires what he called conscious courage, the deliberate choice to stay present with someone even when love feels terrifying. This meant that Friedrich had to learn to notice his urge to withdraw and choose connection instead. The first time Friedrich forced himself to maintain eye contact with Elena while she was sharing something meaningful, he felt like he was going to die. His heart was pounding, his palms were sweating, and every instinct was screaming at him to look away, check his phone, or find an excuse to leave the room. But he stayed present. Elena later said that moment changed everything for her, not because Friedrich was suddenly perfect at intimacy, but because she could feel that he was fighting his own protective mechanisms to stay connected with her. She could sense that his previous withdrawal hadn't been about her. It had been about his own internal battle with vulnerability. The practice of presence, developing conscious intimacy. Jung developed specific practices for individuals healing from love avoidance patterns. He called these presence practices, deliberate exercises designed to build tolerance for intimacy and develop capacity for sustained emotional connection. The first practice is conscious breathing during connection. When love-fear is activated, the breath becomes shallow and rapid, signaling the unconscious to initiate flight or fight responses. Friedrich learned to deliberately deepen his breathing when Elena was being emotionally intimate, sending signals to his unconscious that he was safe despite feeling vulnerable. The second practice is fear acknowledgement without action. Instead of acting on the urge to withdraw, Friedrich learned to name his fear internally. I'm feeling terrified by how much I need Elena right now. This acknowledgement paradoxically reduced the fear's power over his behavior. The third practice is choosing vulnerability incrementally. Rather than trying to suddenly become completely emotionally available, Friedrich learned to increase his intimacy tolerance gradually. He would force himself to maintain eye contact for 30 seconds longer than felt comfortable, then a minute longer, building his capacity for sustained presence. The fourth practice, which Jung considered most important, is sharing the fear rather than acting it out. Instead of withdrawing when vulnerability felt overwhelming, Friedrich learned to say, I'm feeling scared by how much I love you right now. My instinct is to create distance, but I want to stay close instead. This practice transformed everything. Elena could finally understand that Friedrich's previous withdrawal had been about his fear of loving her too much, not about loving her too little. The pitfalls, warning signs of misguided healing. Jung identified several critical pitfalls that individuals must avoid when healing love avoidance patterns. Understanding these warnings is essential because misguided efforts to heal can create new relationship problems. Pitfall 1. Overcompensation and love bombing. When individuals recognize their avoidance patterns, they often swing to the opposite extreme, overwhelming their partner with excessive attention, affection, or presence. This feels artificial and unsustainable, often leading to burnout and a return to withdrawal patterns. Friedrich initially made this mistake, suddenly becoming so attentive to Elena that she felt suffocated rather than loved. Pitfall 2. Intellectual understanding without emotional integration. Many people can analyze their love avoidance patterns but haven't developed the emotional capacity to stay present when fear is activated. They understand the psychology but continue withdrawing despite intellectual awareness of the problem. Jung emphasized that healing requires felt experience, not just cognitive insight. Pitfall 3. Blame shifting and victim identity. Some individuals use their newly discovered love fears to excuse continued avoidance. They tell their partner, "I withdraw because I was abandoned as a child," without taking responsibility for choosing different behaviors in the present. Jung warned that understanding our patterns is meant to empower change, not justify continued dysfunction. Carl Jung made a profound observation that challenges how most people think about emotions and physical experience. While analyzing his own psychological crisis and working with patients, Jung noticed something that modern neuroscience has now validated. Our bodies often register emotional truths before our conscious minds catch up. This isn't mystical thinking. It's sophisticated psychology backed by contemporary research on embodied cognition, the autonomic nervous system, and trauma's impact on the body. Jung realized that what we call gut feelings, physical tension, changes in breathing, and even chronic symptoms often carry important psychological information. Your body is constantly responding to emotional realities that your thinking mind might miss, dismiss, or rationalize away. The implications are striking. If we learn to read these physical responses accurately, we gain access to a sophisticated guidance system for understanding our authentic emotional states, making better decisions, and recognizing when something in our lives needs attention. Today, we'll explore Jung's insights about the mind-body connection, examine what modern research reveals about embodied emotion, and discover practical ways to develop this kind of somatic awareness in your own life. Jung identified a fundamental problem in modern civilization. We've been systematically trained to ignore or override our body's emotional intelligence in favor of purely mental approaches to feeling and decision-making. From childhood, most people learn to disconnect from their physical responses to emotional situations. We're taught that certain feelings are inappropriate, that bodily sensations don't matter as much as rational thoughts, and that we should think our way through emotional experiences rather than feel our way through them. This creates what researchers now call alexithymia, difficulty identifying and describing emotional states. But Jung recognized this isn't just about lacking emotional vocabulary. It's about losing connection to the sophisticated feedback system that evolution gave us for navigating social relationships, making important decisions, and maintaining psychological health. When people disconnect from their body's emotional wisdom, they often make choices that look good on paper but feel empty in practice. They stay in relationships that seem reasonable but lack vitality. They pursue careers that offer security but drain their life force. They follow advice that makes logical sense but ignores their authentic needs and responses. The body begins communicating through what we call symptoms: chronic tension, digestive issues, sleep problems, fatigue, or pain that doesn't have clear medical causes. These aren't random malfunctions, but often represent the body's attempts to communicate emotional realities that aren't being consciously recognized or addressed. Jung observed that this disconnection from embodied emotional awareness is one of the primary sources of modern psychological suffering. People become trapped in their heads while their bodies hold unexpressed grief, unprocessed anger, unacknowledged fear, and unmet needs that never get integrated into conscious awareness and life choices. Jung's understanding of embodied emotional intelligence developed through careful observation of both his patients and himself. He noticed that people's bodies often told different stories than their conscious narratives about their emotional lives. A patient might insist they felt fine about a relationship, while their shoulders carried chronic tension, their breathing remained shallow and constricted, and their jaw stayed perpetually clenched. Jung learned to pay attention to these physical signals as legitimate psychological information rather than dismissing them as irrelevant bodily quirks. He observed patterns. Certain types of unexpressed anger seemed to manifest as jaw tension and headaches. Suppressed grief often appeared as chest constriction and respiratory issues. Unacknowledged fear frequently created digestive problems and overall muscular rigidity. Jung didn't view these as simple cause and effect relationships, but as meaningful connections between emotional experience and physical expression. The body, he realized, serves as both a container for emotional experience and a communication system that reveals psychological truths that might not be accessible through verbal analysis alone. One of Jung's most important insights was recognizing that physical symptoms often represent attempts at self-regulation and healing, rather than just problems to be eliminated. A person's chronic fatigue might reflect their body's wisdom about needing rest and withdrawal from overstimulating situations. Digestive issues might indicate difficulty processing certain life experiences emotionally. This perspective shifts our relationship to physical discomfort from viewing it as an enemy to be conquered to understanding it as a potential messenger carrying important information about our psychological and emotional needs. Contemporary neuroscience has provided remarkable validation for Jung's observations about the body's role in emotional experience and psychological awareness. Dr. Antonio Damasio's groundbreaking research on embodied cognition demonstrates that emotions are fundamentally somatic experiences. The body generates feeling states through changes in heart rate, breathing, muscle tension, and hormonal release that then inform conscious awareness. Emotions aren't just mental phenomena that happen to have physical effects. They're embodied experiences that arise from the body's responses to internal and external situations. Studies using advanced brain imaging reveal that emotional processing often begins in the body through the autonomic nervous system before reaching conscious awareness. This supports Jung's observation that the body frequently knows our emotional truth before the thinking mind does. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's research on trauma has documented how the body holds emotional memories in cellular and muscular patterns. Specific trauma types create predictable patterns of physical holding that persist even when conscious memory of the original experience has been suppressed or forgotten. This research validates Jung's clinical observations about the body serving as a repository for psychological experience. Polyvagal theory, developed by Dr. Stephen Porges, reveals how the vagus nerve system communicates emotional safety or threat through physical sensations, breathing patterns, and autonomic responses. This provides a scientific framework for understanding how the body offers constant feedback about our emotional state and environmental responses. Research on interoception, our ability to sense internal bodily signals, shows that people with greater interoceptive awareness tend to have better emotional regulation, more accurate self-awareness, and improved decision-making abilities. This supports Jung's insight that developing sensitivity to bodily responses enhances overall psychological functioning. Studies on heart rate variability demonstrate that our heart rhythms change in response to different emotional states, and these changes often precede conscious emotional awareness. Learning to recognize these patterns can provide early warning systems for emotional shifts and stress responses. Jung identified several key ways the body communicates emotional information that can be learned and developed with practice and attention. Breathing patterns offer perhaps the most immediate access to emotional states. Anxiety typically creates rapid, shallow breathing, focused in the chest. Depression often involves sighing, restricted breathing, and a sense of respiratory heaviness. Vitality and emotional openness correspond with deeper, more rhythmic breathing that engages the diaphragm and belly. Learning to notice your breathing patterns throughout the day provides real-time feedback about your emotional state and stress levels. Changes in breathing often occur before conscious awareness of emotional shifts, making breath awareness a valuable early warning system. Muscle tension patterns create what researchers call muscle memory of emotional experiences. The jaw often holds unexpressed anger, frustration, or the effort to control emotional expression. Shoulder tension frequently reflects carrying emotional burdens, feeling responsible for others, or holding back authentic expression. Hip tension can indicate suppressed creativity, sexuality, or life energy. Neck and throat tension often relates to difficulty expressing authentic thoughts and feelings. Back tension might reflect lack of support or carrying too much responsibility. These aren't rigid rules, but patterns Jung observed that modern bodywork practitioners have expanded and validated. Learning to scan your body for tension and exploring what emotions might be connected to specific physical holding patterns can provide valuable psychological information. Energy levels and vitality offer feedback about whether your lifestyle and choices align with your authentic needs and values. Chronic fatigue that doesn't improve with rest often indicates emotional depletion, living in ways that drain rather than nourish your deeper self. Natural energy fluctuations throughout the day can indicate your body's authentic rhythms versus schedules imposed by external demands. Paying attention to when you feel most alive and energized versus when you feel depleted can guide decisions about work, relationships, and lifestyle choices. Digestive responses frequently mirror our ability to digest life experiences emotionally. Stomach issues might indicate difficulty processing challenging emotions or situations. Constipation can reflect emotional holding patterns and difficulty letting go. Digestive ease often correlates with good emotional processing and integration. Jung encouraged paying attention to how your digestive system responds to different people, situations, and decisions as feedback about what feels nourishing versus what creates internal stress. Heart rate and cardiovascular responses provide immediate feedback about emotional activation and nervous system arousal. Learning to notice changes in heart rate, blood pressure sensations, and overall cardiovascular activation can indicate authentic responses to people and situations that might conflict with mental judgments about what you think you should feel. Skin sensations and temperature changes often accompany emotional shifts. Blushing, sweating, feeling hot or cold, tingling, or changes in skin sensitivity can indicate emotional activation, attraction, aversion, or nervous system responses that provide information about your authentic reactions to different situations. Jung's most profound understanding of embodied emotional intelligence came through his own psychological crisis from 1913-1919, documented in his famous Red Book. During this period, Jung experienced not only intense psychological and spiritual upheaval, but also dramatic physical symptoms that initially frightened him. He had heart palpitations, breathing difficulties, strange bodily sensations, and what he described as electrical currents running through his body during his visionary experiences. Initially, Jung tried to analyze these physical experiences intellectually, viewing them as symptoms of potential mental illness. But gradually, he realized his body was communicating essential emotional and psychological information that his rational mind couldn't access through thinking alone. Jung began paying careful attention to his physical responses during his active imagination work. He noticed that different psychological encounters created distinct bodily sensations. Engaging with positive archetypal figures produced heart opening and warmth. Shadow work created tension and constriction that revealed his emotional resistance to certain aspects of himself. His body became a sophisticated feedback system for his inner psychological work. Physical sensations indicated when he was moving toward psychological truth versus when he was avoiding or intellectualizing his experience. Jung discovered that his chronic stomach problems were connected to his difficulty digesting the implications of his psychological discoveries. His heart symptoms reflected the emotional intensity of opening to dimensions of experience that his rational scientific training had never prepared him for. Through learning to trust his body's wisdom, Jung developed what he later called embodied individuation, using physical sensation and somatic awareness as guides for psychological development rather than relying solely on mental analysis. This personal journey transformed Jung's entire approach to psychology. He came to recognize that authentic psychological healing must include the body's wisdom, and that intellectual insight without embodied integration remains incomplete and potentially destabilizing. Jung's later writings reveal how this mind-body integration became central to his understanding of individuation. The body doesn't just reflect psychological states, it actively participates in the process of becoming whole, serving as both a container for transformation and a guide toward authentic self-realization. Jung observed that developing sensitivity to the body's emotional wisdom typically involves 5 progressive stages, though the process isn't strictly linear and often involves cycling back through earlier stages at deeper levels. Stage 1, somatic awakening, occurs when people first begin noticing that their body carries emotional information they weren't previously aware of. This might be triggered by physical symptoms that don't respond to medical treatment, moments of recognizing that their body responds differently to certain people or situations than their mind thinks it should, or experiences where gut feelings provide information that proves more accurate than rational analysis. This stage often involves surprise and curiosity, as people realize their body has been communicating all along, but they haven't been listening. There might be some resistance or skepticism, especially for people who have been trained to prioritize rational thinking over bodily awareness. Stage 2, emotional archaeology, involves systematically exploring what emotions and experiences the body has been holding. This stage often reveals suppressed feelings, unprocessed grief, hidden anger, or unexpressed creativity that has been stored in muscle tension, breathing patterns, or chronic symptoms. People frequently experience emotional releases during this stage, as long-held feelings finally get acknowledged and expressed. This can be intense and sometimes overwhelming, requiring support and patience as the backlog of suppressed emotional experience gets processed. Stage 3. Authentic response recognition develops the capacity to distinguish between the body's genuine emotional responses and conditioned reactions. People learn to trust gut feelings about relationships and situations while questioning mental concepts about how they think they should respond. This stage often requires courage to honor authentic responses that conflict with social expectations, family conditioning, or professional demands. It might involve recognizing that certain relationships don't feel good despite looking appropriate, or that career paths that seem logical don't energize or inspire. Stage 4, integrated decision-making, involves learning to make choices that honor both rational analysis and somatic wisdom. People develop skills for using their body's responses as valuable input for decisions about relationships, work, lifestyle, and life direction, while maintaining practical intelligence about consequences and responsibilities. This stage often requires significant changes in life circumstances to better align with authentic needs and responses. It might involve shifts in relationships, career changes, or lifestyle modifications that better support both physical and emotional well-being. Stage 5. Embodied emotional mastery emerges when people can fluidly use their body's emotional intelligence as a sophisticated guidance system integrated with other forms of intelligence. They can maintain authentic emotional expression while navigating complex social and professional demands, using body emotion awareness as an ongoing tool for psychological health and spiritual development. At this stage, the body becomes a trusted advisor that helps people maintain balance, make aligned choices, recognize their authentic needs, and navigate life's challenges with greater wisdom and resilience. Jung identified several pitfalls that can derail healthy development of embodied emotional intelligence, each requiring awareness and skillful navigation to avoid creating new problems. Emotional over-identification occurs when people become so focused on their bodily sensations and emotional states that they lose perspective and become overwhelmed by every feeling. This can lead to emotional reactivity, boundary problems, and inability to function effectively in situations that require some emotional regulation and social intelligence. The antidote involves learning to observe emotions and physical sensations with awareness rather than immediately identifying with or acting on every feeling. Developing what Jung called conscious suffering, the ability to feel emotions fully while maintaining enough perspective to choose conscious responses rather than automatic reactions. Somatic bypassing happens when people use body emotion awareness to avoid dealing with practical responsibilities or difficult life circumstances. They might justify avoiding commitments or acting irresponsibly under the guise of honoring their authentic feelings without considering the impact on others or long-term consequences. Healthy embodied emotional intelligence includes recognizing that authentic response sometimes involves doing difficult things that don't feel immediately pleasurable but serve long-term growth, relationship health, or service to others. Body fundamentalism develops when people become rigid about always following their body's responses, losing capacity for conscious choice and adaptation. This creates a new form of unconsciousness that worships bodily impulses rather than integrating them wisely with other forms of intelligence. The goal is integration rather than replacement, using bodily wisdom as valuable input for decisions while maintaining capacity for rational consideration, moral reflection, and conscious choice about how to respond to authentic feelings in ways that serve growth and relationship. Projection and judgment occurs when people assume others should prioritize embodied emotional truth in the same way they do, becoming critical of people who operate differently or trying to force others to get in touch with their bodies without recognizing that healthy people have diverse approaches to emotional intelligence and self-awareness. Avoiding this pitfall involves recognizing that embodied awareness is one valuable approach among many, and that healthy relationships require accepting different emotional processing styles and intelligence types, rather than insisting everyone develop the same kind of somatic sensitivity. Jung developed specific practices for integrating body-emotion awareness into daily life in ways that enhance both psychological health and practical effectiveness. The morning body scan involves taking 5 to 10 minutes each morning to systematically notice physical sensations throughout your body. Start at the top of your head and slowly move attention down through your face, neck, shoulders, arms, chest, abdomen, back, hips, legs, and feet. Notice areas of tension, ease, warmth, coolness, or other sensations without trying to change anything. Ask each area what it might be communicating about your emotional state or needs for the day. This practice develops interoceptive awareness and provides valuable information about your starting emotional state before engaging with daily activities. Emotional breath awareness involves periodically checking your breathing patterns throughout the day as feedback about your emotional state and stress levels. Notice whether your breathing is shallow or deep, rapid or slow, chest-focused or belly-engaged. When you notice restricted breathing, try taking several conscious deep breaths that engage your diaphragm and belly. This not only provides emotional regulation, but also helps you recognize what situations or interactions affect your nervous system activation. Decision-making body check uses physical responses to help evaluate choices and options. When facing a decision, imagine yourself in each possible scenario and notice your body's response. Does your energy feel expanded or contracted? Does your breathing feel open or restricted? Does your overall sense of vitality increase or decrease? This doesn't replace rational analysis, but provides additional information about which options align with your authentic needs and values versus which options might look good mentally but don't resonate somatically. Relationship energy assessment involves paying attention to how your body responds around different people. Notice changes in your breathing, energy levels, muscle tension, and overall comfort. Some people might leave you feeling energized and open, while others create tension, fatigue, or the need to guard yourself. This information can guide decisions about how much time to spend with different people, what kinds of boundaries might be needed, and which relationships genuinely nourish versus drain your emotional and physical resources. Stress response recognition involves learning to recognize early physical signs of stress activation before they become overwhelming. This might include changes in breathing, muscle tension, heart rate, temperature, or digestive sensations. Developing early warning systems allows you to implement stress management strategies before reaching crisis levels. This might involve taking breaks, changing your environment, using breathing techniques, or addressing whatever is triggering the stress response. Evening integration practice involves spending a few minutes before sleep reviewing the day's experiences through the lens of your body's responses. What felt nourishing versus draining? What created expansion versus contraction? What physical sensations accompanied different emotions throughout the day? This practice helps develop sensitivity to the connections between your choices, experiences, and physical well-being, while identifying patterns that can guide future decisions. When people successfully develop embodied emotional intelligence, the results often extend far beyond just feeling more connected to their bodies. Jung observed profound transformations in overall psychological health, relationships, and life satisfaction. Physical symptoms as teachers. Many people discover that chronic physical symptoms begin resolving when they learn to listen to and respond to the emotional information these symptoms have been trying to communicate. Headaches might ease when someone learns to recognize and express frustration more directly. Digestive issues might improve when they learn to digest difficult emotions rather than suppressing them. This doesn't mean all physical symptoms are purely emotional, but Jung recognized that many symptoms represent the body's attempts to communicate psychological needs that aren't being consciously recognized or addressed. Authentic relationship development. People who develop embodied emotional intelligence often find their relationships becoming more authentic and satisfying. They learn to trust their body's responses to others as valuable information about compatibility, safety, and genuine connection. This might involve ending relationships that feel draining or inauthentic, while developing deeper connections with people who genuinely resonate. The body's wisdom helps distinguish between relationships based on mental compatibility versus those that include genuine energetic and emotional resonance. Career and life path clarity. Many people discover that their body provides clear feedback about work and life directions that align with their authentic nature versus those that look good on paper but don't energize or inspire them. This might lead to career changes, lifestyle modifications, or shifts in priorities that better support both physical vitality and emotional fulfillment. The body becomes a guide for choices that serve long-term thriving rather than just short-term security or social approval. Enhanced intuitive intelligence. As people develop sensitivity to their body's responses, they often find their intuitive abilities significantly enhanced. The body serves as an antenna for subtle information about people, situations, and opportunities that might not be apparent through rational analysis alone. This includes better judgment about timing, improved ability to read social dynamics, and enhanced capacity to recognize opportunities or potential problems before they become obvious through external circumstances. Emotional resilience and regulation. Perhaps most importantly, embodied emotional intelligence provides tools for navigating difficult emotions and stressful situations with greater resilience and skill. Instead of being overwhelmed by emotions or trying to suppress them, people learn to work with their body's natural capacity for emotional processing and regulation. This creates greater emotional stability and the ability to remain centered during challenging circumstances. Jung believed that developing embodied emotional intelligence serves not just individual healing but collective human evolution. He envisioned communities and cultures that honor and integrate body wisdom alongside rational intelligence. When people are connected to their authentic emotional responses through bodily awareness, they become less susceptible to manipulation, propaganda, and collective unconscious possession. They have internal guidance systems that help them distinguish between authentic response and conditioned reaction. Jung observed that cultures integrating body-emotion wisdom tend to have lower rates of mental illness, addiction, and violence because people have healthy ways to process emotional experience rather than suppressing feelings until they explode destructively. In our current era of widespread anxiety, depression, and disconnection, developing embodied emotional intelligence becomes crucial for both individual healing and collective sanity. People connected to their body's wisdom make decisions based on authentic response rather than fear, conditioning, or external pressure. Embodied emotional intelligence naturally supports empathy and compassion because when people are connected to their own emotional reality, they become more sensitive to others' emotional states and needs. This creates more conscious and caring relationships and communities. The development of somatic emotional awareness also supports environmental consciousness. People connected to their body's wisdom tend to be more sensitive to the impact of environmental toxins, processed foods, and unnatural living conditions, leading to choices that support both personal and planetary health. Jung believed humanity's next evolutionary step involves integrating rational intelligence with embodied emotional wisdom, creating what he called whole being intelligence that includes thinking, feeling, and somatic awareness as complementary aspects of human consciousness. As more individuals develop embodied emotional intelligence, collective decision-making processes can begin incorporating not just rational analysis, but also collective somatic wisdom about what supports life, health, and authentic human flourishing. The most powerful validation of Jung's insights comes from people who have successfully developed embodied emotional intelligence and experienced the profound changes this integration can create. Sarah's story. Sarah came to therapy struggling with chronic fatigue, anxiety, and a sense that her successful corporate career felt meaningless despite financial rewards. She had learned to override her body's signals in favor of mental goals and social expectations. Through developing body awareness, Sarah discovered her fatigue was her body's wisdom about needing more rest, creativity, and connection to nature. Her anxiety corresponded to situations where she was pushing herself beyond her authentic capacity or engaging in work that conflicted with her values. Learning to trust her body's feedback, Sarah made gradual changes, negotiating more flexible work arrangements, spending more time outdoors, and pursuing the artistic interests she had abandoned. Her physical symptoms improved dramatically as she learned to honor her body's authentic needs, rather than forcing herself to meet external expectations that drained her vitality. Michael's experience. Michael sought help for relationship difficulties and a pattern of choosing partners who seemed right intellectually, but with whom he felt no genuine connection. He had learned to evaluate relationships based on mental compatibility lists rather than felt sense. Developing embodied emotional intelligence, Michael began noticing how his body responded differently to various people. Some individuals left him feeling energized and open, while others created subtle tension or the need to guard himself. Regardless of how the relationship looked on paper, this body wisdom guided Michael toward relationships with genuine energetic resonance rather than just mental compatibility. He eventually found a partnership that satisfied both intellectual connection and embodied attraction, creating the authentic intimacy he had been seeking. Lisa's journey. Lisa struggled with chronic anger and explosive emotional reactions that damaged her relationships and professional life. She had learned to suppress emotions until they erupted uncontrollably, creating chaos and shame. Through body awareness practices, Lisa learned to recognize early physical signs of emotional activation, muscle tension, breathing changes, and energy shifts that preceded her explosive reactions. This gave her opportunities to address emotional needs before they became overwhelming. Lisa developed skills for processing anger through physical movement, breathing practices, and direct communication, rather than suppression followed by explosion. Her relationships improved dramatically as she learned to express emotions authentically while maintaining respect and boundaries. These stories illustrate Jung's insight that embodied emotional intelligence provides practical tools for creating more authentic, healthy, and fulfilling lives, rather than just theoretical understanding of psychological concepts. Jung emphasized that developing embodied emotional intelligence involves working with shadow aspects of this process, the ways body awareness can be misused or become unbalanced. Spiritual materialism can develop when people become prideful about their body awareness, using their sensitivity as a form of superiority over others who seem less aware or integrated. This creates a new form of ego inflation that actually disconnects from the humility and compassion that authentic embodied wisdom naturally generates. The antidote involves recognizing that sensitivity is a responsibility rather than an achievement, and that true body wisdom includes awareness of our ongoing need for growth, support, and connection with others regardless of our level of somatic development. Emotional fundamentalism occurs when people become rigid about always following their body's impulses without considering broader contexts, consequences, or the needs of others. This can lead to narcissistic behavior justified as authentic expression or honoring my truth. Healthy embodied intelligence includes recognizing that authentic response sometimes involves conscious choice about how to express feelings in ways that serve relationships, growth, and service, rather than just immediate emotional release. Victim identity can develop when people become identified with their sensitivity as a burden rather than a gift, blaming others for their emotional reactions or expecting the world to accommodate their needs without taking responsibility for their own emotional regulation and boundary management. True embodied wisdom includes developing resilience, self-responsibility, and the capacity to maintain emotional balance in challenging environments rather than requiring others to manage their emotional experience for them. Analysis. Paralysis might emerge when people become so focused on analyzing their body's responses that they lose capacity for spontaneous action and authentic expression. Overthinking physical sensations can become another form of mental control rather than genuine body wisdom. The goal is developing sensitivity that enhances rather than replaces natural responsiveness, using body awareness to support authentic action rather than creating new forms of self-consciousness and hesitation. Understanding the science behind Jung's insights helps ground these concepts in contemporary knowledge while maintaining their transformational potential. The autonomic nervous system provides the primary pathway through which emotional experience manifests physically. The sympathetic branch creates activation responses, increased heart rate, muscle tension, and heightened alertness in response to perceived challenges or threats. The parasympathetic branch supports rest, digestion, and restoration. Learning to recognize these different nervous system states through physical sensation provides immediate feedback about your emotional and stress responses to different situations, people, and internal states. Interoception, the ability to sense internal bodily signals, involves specialized neurons that communicate information about heart rate, breathing, muscle tension, and other internal states to brain regions involved in emotional processing and self-awareness. Research shows that people with greater interoceptive sensitivity tend to have more accurate emotional self-awareness, better emotional regulation, and improved decision-making abilities. This validates Jung's insight that developing sensitivity to bodily responses enhances overall psychological functioning. Vagus nerve function plays a crucial role in emotional regulation and social connection. The vagus nerve connects the brain to major organs and communicates information about emotional safety or threat through physical sensations and autonomic responses. Practices that support vagus nerve health, including certain breathing techniques, gentle movement, and social connection, enhance both physical resilience and emotional regulation capacity. Neurotransmitter systems, including serotonin, dopamine, and GABA, significantly affect both mood states and physical sensations. Many of these neurotransmitters are produced in the gut, supporting Jung's observation about the connection between digestive health and emotional well-being. Understanding these connections helps explain why body-based approaches to emotional health can be so effective and why physical practices often support psychological healing more effectively than purely verbal therapies. Mirror neuron systems help explain how we unconsciously pick up emotional and energetic information from others through subtle physical cues. This provides a scientific foundation for Jung's observations about how sensitive people might unconsciously absorb others' emotional states through their body's empathic responses. For people ready to deepen their embodied emotional intelligence, Jung's approach includes more sophisticated practices for working with body-emotion connections. Emotional archaeology through movement involves using gentle movement and stretching to explore emotional content held in different muscle groups. Move slowly through different positions, reaching your arms overhead, twisting your spine, opening your chest, and notice what emotions or memories arise. This isn't about forcing emotional release, but about creating opportunities for suppressed feelings to emerge naturally through movement. Some areas of your body might feel emotionally charged or resistant to movement, indicating places where emotions have been stored. Dialogue with physical symptoms treats symptoms as communications from your unconscious rather than problems to be eliminated. If you have chronic headaches, back pain, or digestive issues, try having an imaginary conversation with the symptom. Ask what it needs to communicate, what it's trying to protect you from, or what changes it's requesting in your life. While not all symptoms have psychological origins, this practice often reveals valuable information about stress patterns, emotional needs, or lifestyle factors that affect your health. Energy boundary work involves learning to sense and manage your personal energy field through body awareness. Notice how your sense of personal space and energy changes around different people and in various environments. Practice expanding and contracting your energy field consciously, learning to sense when you need more space or protection versus when you can safely open and connect. This develops both emotional boundaries and sensitivity to subtle environmental influences. Somatic dream work extends Jung's approach to working with dreams by including attention to the physical sensations and body responses that dreams evoke. When recalling a dream, notice what physical sensations arise and what your body's responses might be communicating about the dream's meaning. Dreams often include important somatic information that pure mental analysis might miss. Your body's response to dream content can provide additional layers of meaning and guidance for integration. Archetypal body sensing involves using your body's responses to explore your relationship with different archetypal energies. Notice how your body feels when you imagine embodying different roles or qualities: the warrior, the nurturer, the sage, the artist. Which archetypal energies create expansion and vitality versus contraction and resistance? This can provide valuable information about which aspects of your potential feel natural versus which might require more conscious development. Relational body mapping involves tracking how your body responds in different types of relationships and social situations. Keep a brief journal noting your physical responses after spending time with different people or in various social contexts. Over time, patterns emerge that can guide decisions about relationships, social boundaries, and the kinds of interactions that support versus drain your emotional and physical well-being. Jung's insights about embodied emotional intelligence weren't entirely novel, but represented a return to wisdom that many traditional cultures had maintained for centuries before modern civilization's mind-body split. Ancient Greek culture included sophisticated understanding of the body-soul connection through practices like temple healing, where physical symptoms were treated as communications from the gods, requiring both medical treatment and spiritual attention to underlying causes. Traditional Chinese medicine has always recognized emotions as energetic experiences that affect specific organ systems and create physical symptoms when suppressed or imbalanced. The concept of qi flowing through meridian systems provides a framework for understanding how emotional states manifest physically. Ayurvedic medicine from India includes detailed understanding of how different emotional states affect physical constitution and health, with specific recommendations for lifestyle, diet, and practices based on individual mind-body types and imbalances. Indigenous healing traditions worldwide consistently recognize illness as often involving spiritual and emotional dimensions that require attention to restore physical health. Shamanic practices frequently include body-based techniques for releasing emotional trauma and restoring energetic balance. Medieval Christian mystics like Hildegard of Bingen developed sophisticated understanding of the body as a temple containing spiritual wisdom, with physical symptoms often indicating spiritual imbalances that required attention to emotional and relational healing. Jung's contribution was translating these traditional insights into language and practices accessible to modern people while validating them through clinical observation and psychological theory. His work bridges ancient wisdom and contemporary science, showing how traditional understanding of body-mind integration can be recovered and applied in current contexts without abandoning rational intelligence or scientific rigor. Jung observed that certain types of people tend to benefit most from developing embodied emotional intelligence, while others might need different approaches or careful modification of body-based practices. Highly sensitive people often naturally have greater interoceptive awareness and may benefit tremendously from learning to understand and work skillfully with their natural sensitivity rather than viewing it as a burden or trying to suppress it. However, highly sensitive individuals might need to develop emotional boundaries and regulation skills alongside body awareness to avoid becoming overwhelmed by their own or others' emotional states. Trauma survivors can benefit greatly from body-based approaches that help restore healthy nervous system function and emotional regulation, but this work often requires skilled guidance to avoid re-traumatization or overwhelming activation. Trauma-informed body work recognizes that healing happens gradually and requires establishing safety and choice rather than pushing through resistance or forcing emotional releases. People with anxiety disorders might initially find body awareness practices triggering if they increase focus on physical sensations associated with anxiety. Modified approaches that emphasize grounding, breathing, and gentle awareness rather than intense exploration often work better. Depression and chronic fatigue often respond well to gentle body awareness practices that help people reconnect with their natural energy rhythms and identify what genuinely nourishes versus drains their vitality. Intellectual types who live primarily in their minds might need patient, gradual introduction to body awareness without judgment about their current disconnection from physical sensation. Addictive patterns often improve through body awareness practices that help people recognize authentic needs and feelings that substances or behaviors have been attempting to address, though this work typically requires additional support for addressing the addictive patterns themselves. Jung emphasized that embodied emotional intelligence is one valuable approach among many, and that different people need different combinations of intellectual, emotional, somatic, and spiritual practices for optimal psychological development. One of the most important aspects of Jung's approach involves learning to integrate body wisdom with rational intelligence, rather than replacing thinking with feeling or creating new forms of imbalance. Complementary intelligence recognizes that rational analysis and embodied wisdom provide different types of valuable information that work best when combined skillfully. Rational intelligence excels at analyzing consequences, considering multiple perspectives, and planning for long-term outcomes. Embodied wisdom provides immediate feedback about authentic needs, values, alignment, and emotional truth that might not be apparent through thinking alone. The goal isn't to choose one over the other, but to develop what Jung called transcendent function, the ability to hold tension between different types of knowing until a more complete understanding emerges that honors both rational and somatic intelligence. Timing and context. Sensitivity involves learning when to prioritize different types of intelligence based on the situation. Crisis situations might require immediate rational response, while major life decisions often benefit from taking time to sense both logical implications and embodied responses. Relationship conflicts might need both emotional awareness of authentic feelings and rational consideration of communication strategies and consequences. Career decisions can integrate practical analysis of opportunities with embodied sense of what work feels nourishing versus depleting. Integration practices help develop the capacity to hold both analytical and somatic awareness simultaneously rather than splitting between them. This might involve making pro and con lists, while also sitting quietly and sensing your body's response to each option. During conversations, you can maintain awareness of both the logical content being discussed and your physical responses to the interaction, noticing when your body feels open or guarded, energized or drained, without necessarily acting on this information, but using it as additional data for understanding the situation. Avoiding false dichotomies requires recognizing that thinking versus feeling represents an artificial split that doesn't exist in healthy psychological functioning. Emotions contain intelligence about values and needs. Rational analysis can serve emotional wisdom by helping find skillful ways to meet authentic needs. Jung emphasized that individuation involves developing all psychological functions rather than becoming identified with any single approach to life. Embodied emotional intelligence serves the larger goal of psychological wholeness rather than replacing other forms of intelligence. Jung recognized that many people initially experience resistance to body awareness practices, often because their bodies hold difficult emotions or traumatic experiences that the psyche has been protecting them from feeling. Understanding resistance as protection reframes resistance not as something to overcome, but as information about what your system needs to feel safe enough for deeper exploration. If body awareness practices feel overwhelming or triggering, this might indicate the need for additional support, slower pacing, or different approaches. Resistance often represents wisdom about timing and capacity. Your psyche might be protecting you from experiencing more than you can currently handle or integrate healthily. Creating safety first involves establishing conditions that support nervous system regulation before attempting deeper body awareness work. This might include working with qualified therapists, developing emotional regulation skills, or ensuring adequate support systems. Physical safety includes being in environments where you feel secure and won't be interrupted. Emotional safety involves having support for processing whatever emotions might arise through body awareness practices. Gradual exploration respects the body's natural protective mechanisms while gently expanding awareness over time. Start with brief, gentle practices rather than intensive exploration. Notice small changes in breathing, posture, or energy rather than searching for dramatic experiences. The body often needs time to trust that it's safe to reveal what it has been holding. Patience and consistency often work better than forcing or pushing through resistance. Working with trauma history requires special consideration when trauma has affected the body's natural capacity for self-regulation and safety. Trauma-informed approaches recognize that the body might have learned to dissociate from physical sensation as a survival mechanism. Re-establishing healthy body awareness after trauma typically requires professional support and approaches specifically designed for trauma recovery rather than general body awareness practices that might be activating or overwhelming. Honoring individual differences recognizes that some people naturally have greater interoceptive sensitivity while others might be more kinesthetic, visual, or auditory in their processing styles. Not everyone needs to develop the same level of body awareness to live authentic, healthy lives. The goal is finding approaches to emotional intelligence and self-awareness that work for your unique constitution and history, rather than forcing yourself to fit a particular model of how awareness should develop. Jung's approach to embodied emotional intelligence includes recognizing the spiritual significance of the body as a container for psychological and spiritual development, rather than viewing it as merely a physical vehicle. The body as temple represents Jung's understanding that psychological transformation occurs through embodied experience rather than purely mental insight. The body serves as the alchemical vessel where psychological integration happens, holding both the raw material of unconscious content and the space for transformation. This perspective shifts the relationship to physical experience from viewing the body as an obstacle to transcendence to recognizing it as the very means through which authentic spiritual development occurs. Incarnation and individuation involves recognizing that becoming whole requires full embodiment rather than spiritual bypassing or transcendence that leaves the body behind. Jung's concept of individuation includes integrating all aspects of human experience: mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. True spiritual development, from Jung's perspective, involves bringing consciousness into full human experience rather than escaping from it. The body becomes a partner in spiritual development rather than something to be overcome. Sacred sexuality and creativity recognizes the body's sexual and creative energies as spiritual forces rather than merely biological drives. Jung understood that creative and sexual energies often carry spiritual significance and can serve individuation when integrated consciously. This doesn't mean acting on every impulse, but rather recognizing these energies as potentially sacred forces that can be channeled toward creative expression, life vitality, and spiritual development when honored appropriately. Somatic prayer and meditation includes body-based spiritual practices that integrate physical awareness with contemplative disciplines. This might involve walking meditation, contemplative movement, or prayer practices that include attention to breathing and physical sensation. Jung practiced active imagination, which often included somatic awareness as part of dialoguing with unconscious content. The body provides valuable feedback about spiritual experiences and can serve as a container for holding spiritual insights until they can be integrated into daily life. Death and embodiment includes recognizing that awareness of mortality can deepen appreciation for embodied experience rather than creating detachment from physical life. Jung's approach to death anxiety often involved fuller engagement with life rather than premature transcendence. The body's mortality reminds us to inhabit our lives fully while we have them, using embodied awareness to experience the sacred dimension of ordinary human experience, rather than waiting for spiritual experiences that exist outside normal life. Jung believed that developing embodied emotional intelligence has implications beyond individual healing, potentially contributing to healing collective trauma and creating more conscious communities and societies. Collective body awareness recognizes that communities and cultures also have somatic characteristics, shared nervous system patterns, collective emotional holding, and group responses to historical trauma that affect entire populations. Understanding these patterns can help explain cultural tendencies toward anxiety, depression, violence, or disconnection, while pointing toward collective healing approaches that address root causes rather than just managing symptoms. Historical trauma and somatic memory acknowledges that traumatic experiences can be transmitted through families and cultures in ways that affect the nervous system and emotional patterns of people who weren't directly exposed to the original trauma. Embodied healing approaches can help individuals recognize when their physical and emotional patterns might be carrying ancestral or cultural trauma that needs acknowledgement and healing rather than just personal therapy focused on individual history. Community nervous system regulation involves recognizing how individual nervous system health contributes to collective emotional climate. People who develop healthy, embodied emotional regulation naturally support more regulated, conscious community dynamics. This might involve creating community spaces that support nervous system regulation, developing cultural practices that honor embodied wisdom, or designing social systems that support rather than stress human nervous systems. Environmental embodiment recognizes the connection between personal body awareness and environmental sensitivity. People connected to their body's wisdom often become more aware of environmental factors that affect health and well-being. This can lead to choices that support both personal and environmental health, creating positive feedback loops where individual embodied awareness contributes to collective environmental consciousness. Political and social implications extend Jung's insights to recognize how disconnection from embodied wisdom contributes to social problems including exploitation, violence, and unconscious collective decisions that harm human and planetary well-being. Communities that value and integrate embodied emotional intelligence might make more conscious collective decisions about resource use, conflict resolution, and social organization that consider long-term consequences and authentic human needs rather than just immediate economic or political gains. Jung's vision of psychological maturity includes developing what he called embodied individuation, the capacity to use body wisdom as part of a larger constellation of intelligence that serves both personal authenticity and collective service. Conscious sensitivity involves developing the ability to sense subtle information through the body while maintaining appropriate boundaries and emotional regulation. This isn't about becoming more reactive or emotionally unstable, but about becoming more sensitively responsive to authentic needs and environmental information. Mature sensitivity includes the capacity to sense what's needed in relationships and situations while maintaining enough stability to respond consciously rather than just reactively. Service through embodiment recognizes that people who develop a healthy, embodied emotional intelligence naturally become resources for others who are struggling with disconnection, emotional overwhelm, or lack of body awareness. This service doesn't necessarily involve becoming a therapist or teacher, but might include modeling healthy embodiment, creating environments that support others' nervous system regulation, or simply being present in ways that help others feel safe to explore their own body wisdom. Integrated decision-making represents the capacity to make complex life decisions that consider multiple factors including rational analysis, emotional authenticity, practical consequences, relationships, impacts, an embodied sense of what serves long-term thriving. This integrated decision-making process might take longer than purely rational or purely emotional approaches, but tends to result in choices that are more sustainable and satisfying over time. Embodied leadership involves using body awareness to guide leadership decisions, recognizing when group dynamics feel healthy or stressed, sensing what approaches might serve group needs, and maintaining personal regulation while holding space for others' emotional experiences. Leaders who develop embodied intelligence often create more conscious, sustainable organizations and communities because they can sense systemic health and dysfunction in ways that pure rational analysis might miss. Mature boundaries and connection includes the capacity to maintain healthy personal boundaries while remaining open to genuine connection and mutual influence. This requires sophisticated body awareness to sense when opening is appropriate versus when protection is needed. Mature embodiment includes the capacity for both solitude and intimacy, independence and interdependence based on authentic assessment of personal needs and relational dynamics rather than rigid rules about how to relate. Legacy and transmission involves recognizing that embodied emotional intelligence can be transmitted to future generations. Through modeling, creating healthy family and community dynamics, and contributing to cultural healing that affects collective patterns. Jung believed that individuals who achieve genuine integration naturally contribute to collective evolution by demonstrating possibilities for healthier human functioning and creating environments that support others' development toward greater consciousness and authenticity. Jung's insights about embodied emotional intelligence point toward a fundamental shift in how we understand psychological health and human development. Rather than viewing the body as separate from or secondary to mental and spiritual life, his approach recognizes embodied awareness as essential for authentic individuation and collective healing. The journey of developing embodied emotional intelligence isn't a destination to reach, but an ongoing process of deepening sensitivity, integration, and service that continues throughout life. Each life stage brings new opportunities to develop more sophisticated relationships between body wisdom and conscious choice. Your body is speaking to you right now through your breathing patterns, energy levels, areas of tension or ease, and responses to the ideas presented in this exploration. This communication represents a sophisticated guidance system that can support more authentic living, healthier relationships, and greater service to collective healing when developed skillfully and integrated wisely. Jung would encourage you to begin where you are, with whatever level of body awareness currently feels accessible, and to approach this development with patience, curiosity, and respect for your own timing and capacity. The goal isn't to become more emotional or reactive, but to become more whole through honoring all dimensions of human intelligence. The implications extend far beyond personal development. As more individuals develop embodied emotional intelligence, we create possibilities for more conscious communities, healthier relationships with our environment, and collective decision-making processes that consider long-term thriving rather than just immediate gains. Your individual journey toward embodied awareness contributes to this larger healing process, while supporting your own authentic expression and psychological health. The body's wisdom has been waiting patiently for your attention, ready to serve your growth toward greater wholeness and service when you're ready to listen. Jung's legacy reminds us that we are not just thinking beings having occasional emotional experiences, but embodied souls whose physical experience contains essential wisdom for navigating life with authenticity, compassion, and conscious awareness. The integration of body wisdom with rational intelligence represents not a return to primitiveness, but an evolution toward more complete human functioning that serves both individual flourishing and collective healing. The journey begins with a single breath, a moment of awareness, a willingness to listen to the sophisticated intelligence that has been guiding you all along through the wisdom of your embodied experience.